Brian Flores has a new weapon just in time for the start of training camp. Plus, who's coming out on top of this quarterback battle? Welcome to the Vibe of the Vikings, where we catch the real feel for Minnesota Vikings football. I'm your host, Josh Kolodziejski, and we've got a jam-packed show today as training camp is finally here, which means you can call this the start of the 2026 season. Everything that is going to happen gets its foundation during July and August. So everything that happens during this next month and a half is going to be super important for whatever happens during this 2026 season. And there's a ton that's already happened as the Vikings get reported today fully. And one of those things is a new defensive back. We'll talk about that. Another one of those things is an extension for one of the best players on this Minnesota Vikings offensive line. We'll also address those ramifications and give you some other brief news and notes before getting into the main event. Who is going to win the quarterback battle between JJ McCarthy and Kyler Murray? Thanks for joining us. We're a part of the Grey Duck Sports Network here on Vibe of the Vikings. You can follow us on Twitter at Grey Duck Sports or on YouTube at Grey Duck Sports, and then TikTok, we are at grey.duck.sports. There you can find all of our podcasts on the network, which includes the Grey Duck NFL show and the Twinkie Town Tavern. And you can also see clips from those shows and different stories that we're doing and different series about the Vikings, Twins, and the state of the NFL at large. All of that, again, is at Grey Duck Sports on Twitter and YouTube, and at grey.duck.sports over on TikTok. Well, it's finally here. Training camp is underway at TCO Performance Center. All the players are there. Nobody is holding in because, as we'll talk about in a little bit, somebody just got an extension. The only candidate that was really a threat to hold in got his money and is going to be a member of the Minnesota Vikings for quite some time. But with the opening of training camp, that is the first time that fans can go and see how this Minnesota Vikings team looks, and they can go and make their own analysis. They can play football GM, football head coach, as they watch players go through drills and go through scrimmages and go through plays at the line of scrimmage, and you can decide who's going to be the next Minnesota Vikings quarterback based on what you see at the practice. And if you want to go to public practices, the first open one is going to be Back Together Weekend, and that's on August 1st from 12 to 5 p.m. Again, August 1st, 12 to 5 p.m. And over the next week, they'll also have open practices on August 3rd, 4th, and 5th. That is next Wednesday is the 5th, and all of those run 12 p.m. to 5 p.m. So plenty of time to go and check on your favorite football team and to kind of see what they have in the works for the 2026 season. And obviously, early on, no pads. It's going to be a lot of drills. It's going to be a lot of install of the offensive system. It's going to be some continuity under Wes Phillips, who's been the offensive coordinator, and Kevin O'Connell, who's been the play caller essentially since 2022. So we're entering now a fifth year of having the same play caller. So the offense is going to be similar, albeit with some new play calls. And now with Frank Smith there, one of the things I'm interested in watching is how Frank Smith integrates the running game, or how Kevin O'Connell integrates Frank Smith's running game into the Minnesota Vikings offense. Frank Smith, now an assistant coach with us. He was the offensive run game coordinator for the Miami Dolphins under Mike McDaniel last season. And the Miami Dolphins, while not always effective running the ball, always seem to have the most creative sorts of run schemes and the pre-snap motions. And they were the ones that first started the cheat motion, which helped players get out on the edge and block a little bit earlier before the NFL stepped in and banned that. But he's an innovative mind that is going to change what this Minnesota Vikings offense does in the run game. So if you are going to go to the public practices either on August 1st, 3rd, 4th, or 5th over this next week, see what sort of motions they're using on run plays and see how they're lining up, how Max Bredesen is being used, and how some of these wide receivers are doing blocking, because you need to be a good blocker in order to be in there in the run game. And I know that hasn't always been the case with Jordan Addison and Justin Jefferson. They've been fine, but A lot of times, like in 2024, they would bring in Brandon Powell and Trent Sherfield on run plays because they were the better run-blocking wide receivers. But see how all of those guys are utilized and see how much more creative this offensive run plan is. Because I think throughout the course of the Kevin O'Connell era, one of the major criticisms is that the run game hasn't really ever looked super spectacular. Even in his first year with Dalvin Cook, that was kind of Dalvin Cook's first year taking a step back. Even though he had good numbers in 2022, he kind of took a step back and wasn't the efficient player that he was in 2019, 2020, and 2021. So I'm excited to see if the run game becomes a part of the Minnesota Vikings identity moving forward. I'm in Arizona, so that's where I live, so I'm not going to be able to go to any of these Minnesota Vikings training camp practices. I need you to take the videos, show us what we're seeing, show us what Frank Smith, Kevin O'Connell, and Wes Phillips are cooking up, because whoever the quarterback is going to be, Kyler Murray, JJ McCarthy, Carson Wentz, or Max Brosmer, they are going to be helped out exponentially if they have a run game that is unpredictable, and if they are making linebackers and safeties second guess where they need to be with all of these sorts of motions. So that is one of the biggest things that I am looking for, is just how much that offensive structure changes. And then, of course, Brian Flores seems to add a new wrinkle every single year. We'll get more into that with one of the signings that he's brought in, and I'll let you know what I think Flores' defense is going to do to take another step forward during this 2026 season. But let's talk about some of these biggest battles in training camp. We will go through 5 that I have. We'll mention the 5th one, and then we'll talk about it a little bit more in depth later on in the episode. But you're coming into training camp, you're seeing who is getting the first team reps, and I think you're going to see a lot of James Pierre versus Isaiah Rodgers. Now, both of these guys are going to get plenty of playing time. Both of these guys are going to see the field a lot because the Vikings are going to run a lot of nickel sets. Last year when they ran nickel, after Jeff Okudah got injured, a lot of times they would just bring in a third safety, Jay Ward, Theo Jackson, Harrison Smith, or Josh Metellus. Some combination of those 3 would be on the field, so they ran a little bit more big nickel. But when we saw the Minnesota Vikings with competent cornerbacks in 2024, they were using 3 cornerbacks and using Byron Murphy. They were using Shaq Griffin and Stephon Gilmore. And then the safeties were just Harrison Smith or Cam Bynum, and then Josh Metellus as that linebacker safety hybrid. So when they were in nickel then, they want to have a player that can be good in man coverage or in zone coverage, and whose first biggest, strongest trait is their ability to play the pass and be locked down in press coverage, or pass coverage rather. So we're going to see Isaiah Rodgers and James Pierre both get reps on the outside in those nickel sets, if they can both prove that they're competent enough to play in that role, I guess I should say, during training camp, because during those times, then Byron Murphy can go to the inside and play the slot. Now, when they're in their base defense, or when they have a safety as the nickel instead, then Byron Murphy is just going to kick to the outside. They're not going to kick Byron Murphy off of the field because of how explosive he is and how big of a playmaker he can be for this team. So they move him to the outside, which means that other cornerback spot in the base defense or in the big nickel set is going to be open to either James Pierre or Isaiah Rodgers. And both of these guys, I think, are competent enough to lock down that position. Isaiah Rodgers showed a lot of flashes last year, especially, of course, in that Cincinnati Bengals game with the 2 defensive touchdowns and the 99.9 PFF grade. But I also like what I see on film from James Pierre, and I think he's going to be a big part of this Minnesota Vikings defense. And again, this is a lower stakes battle because both of them are going to get plenty of playing time. But Isaiah Rodgers has the speed, and he will cap anything that goes deep. I like a little bit better James Pierre, who doesn't have as much speed, but I like his ability to click and close, which is being able to read exactly when the wide receiver is stopping his break and then sprinting forward in these sort of zone match looks. Now, the Vikings are going to run a lot of cover 2. They're going to run a lot of quarters, which means our outside corners in cover 2 are going to be backing up 10, 20 yards before going into the flats. So they kind of drop back a little bit, they'll jam the wide receiver, and then they'll just cover the flats. And Brian Flores likes to keep everything in front of him. He'd rather have his cornerbacks go a little bit deeper when they're playing in the flats, just so nobody can get behind him and get into that hole between the safety on the outside and the cornerback on the outside that exists in the middle of those two on that half of the field. So I like what James Pierre can do because he will give that space underneath, but he can click and close on that space to cut it off easily. I think that is one of the things that maybe Isaiah Rodgers was not as great at. Looking at film is the click and close when he is in that cover two sort of set. And I think you can force a few more incompletions with James Pierre on the outside than Isaiah Rodgers, but I also like Isaiah Rodgers' ability in quarters a little bit more than I like James Pierre because he has more of the athleticism. And maybe that's just going to be when Flores wants to run a cover two against a team more often, he's going to run with James Pierre. If he wants to run quarters or if he wants to run palms, he's going to go with Isaiah Rodgers more in that game. But I like what Isaiah Rodgers can do in quarters because in quarters, if you are the outside cornerback, you are reading first the furthest most wide receiver on your side of the field, the one who is closest to the sideline. And you are first seeing, does he go up? Does he go out? Does he go in? And if the answer is he goes either up or out, either vertically or to the outside, then you are now in man coverage against that player. And I trust Isaiah Rodgers in sticky man-to-man coverage a little bit more than James Pierre. I think he's a good zone corner is James Pierre, and I like Isaiah Rodgers a little bit in man. And if they go underneath, then you pass them off and you immediately look to the next inside wide receiver to see if they're going vertical and covering that. And then you kind of get to read the quarterback's eyes after that point. And that is a situation where I like Isaiah Rodgers a little bit more than James Pierre. So maybe talking about this competition is all going to be for nothing because both of these players are going to see so much time on the field and both of them have skills that they excel at. But it's still going to be fun to watch both of them battle for that outside cornerback number 2 spot when the Minnesota Vikings are in their base set or their big nickel. Going on to perhaps the most important battle in training camp outside of the quarterback battle, it's going to be at center, which is Michael Juergens versus Blake Brandel. And I think this Minnesota Vikings offensive line is going to be very, very solid if it stays healthy. And the only question is who is going to play center. And you have a natural guard in Michael Juergens who has moved to center. And then you have Blake Brandel who had never played center in his NFL career or college career, didn't even know how to snap a ball last year, but played center a lot for the Minnesota Vikings when Ryan Kelly was injured for the concussion a couple of times during last season. They used Blake Brandel a lot. They also rotated in Michael Juergens at times. But when you look back on film, I was watching, because I wanted to see some Jalen Carter film for my other show, the Grey Duck NFL Show, I was watching to see what Jalen Carter was doing on 3rd and long in passing sets against other teams. And when I got to the Eagles game against the Vikings, where the Vikings used both Blake Brandel and Michael Juergens, Blake Brandel was able to anchor really well against Jalen Carter. And if he can do that against some of the best interior defensive linemen in the NFL, then he's got a good chance to win that job. Michael Juergens might have a little bit more experience heading into this competition, but even with a tall center like Blake Brandel, the way that he was able to handle Jalen Carter on a lot of these snaps, I think there is a lot of upside if he knows how to snap the football. If he's been working on that all offseason, if he has learned the cadence of his quarterback. He's been a great utility player when he had to be the left guard in 2024 throughout the entire season. That was a little bit testy, but when he's had to fill in at tackle, at guard, and now at center, he has proven his worth, and I want to see him win that battle, because if you have him at center and you have Will Fries, Brian O'Neill, Christian Darrisaw, and Donovan Jackson all around, I think you have an offensive line that can be competitive against most defensive lines in the NFL, except maybe the Los Angeles Rams, whose skill chart on their defensive line is completely crazy. I think it's going to come down to, can Blake Brandel snap the ball? If he can't play center. And then the job goes to Michael Juergens, unless Michael Juergens has taken a significant step forward. So that is one of the other battles to watch if you are going to training camp. Another one is the punting battle, Johnny Hekker versus Brett Thorson. Brett Thorson, a younger punter, obviously. Johnny Hekker is a veteran who has always been a solid punter in the NFL, and then he also brings an ability to throw the football and is one of the best trick play punters in league history. So I think that kind of gives him the upside for me, even if he might not have as strong of a leg or as much hang time as Brett Thorson could possibly get. And I'm not going to say I know anything about Brett Thorson or that I've watched any film on Brett Thorson, but let's just assume because he's younger, he has a strong leg and he can get more hang time. I still, even if there is an edge in that way to Thorson, I like what Johnny Hekker has been able to do on fourth downs for whenever he's been with the Rams or whatever other teams that he's played for. He's been able at times to run fake punts and run them successfully, and has been accurate for a punter at throwing the football. And just being able to keep a special teams unit on its toes all season, I think, is worth that, even if you only run a fake punt 2 or 3 times over the course of the season where Johnny Hekker throws the football. So my money's on Johnny Hekker to win that one over Brett Thorson. And then this one isn't really a competition, but I think it's just sorting through the different personnel in this Minnesota Vikings second and third level. When you're in nickel, when you're in dime, when you want to run when you want to go heavy against the run, when you want to go heavy against the pass. You've got a ton of players that you can choose from. Now, some of them might end up being placed on the waiver list at the end of preseason, but right now, that group, you're going to have probably 7 of these guys in on every play, and you might have some rotations, but that is Blake Cashman, Eric Wilson, Jamal Adams, Ivan Pace, Jay Ward, Josh Metellus, Theo Jackson, Jake Golday, and then Jacoby Thomas. They draft Golday, they draft Thomas as promising rookies. Golday, obviously, coming in the second round, has a little bit more of a ceiling than Jacoby Thomas, who was an older safety with Miami, but Jacoby Thomas is a big older safety. He's an athletic, experienced safety, so I'm excited to see what Jacoby Thomas can do. Jake Golday is a lot like Andrew Van Ginkel, is a lot like Eric Wilson in that he can play in coverage, he can go up against the run, and he can rush the passer, or at least blitz. And when you have the athleticism to blitz in a Brian Flores system as a linebacker, more often than not, you're getting open gaps to blitz through. So if he has the athleticism and the burst to get faster to the quarterback through those open gaps than anyone else, then he's going to see a lot of time, especially on third and long or second and long situations when Brian Flores, especially in second and long, likes to bring a lot of pressure. And then Blake Cashman, Eric Wilson, we saw what they could do all season. They're probably going to be on the field. You can probably lock down at least Blake Cashman through every single snap that he's healthy as one of those 7 no matter what. But it'll be interesting to see how they sort through that, and if Harrison Smith comes back, how he factors in. Obviously, he would get a lot of playing time as well. I want to just see how Josh Metellus is used, how Theo Jackson is used, how Jay Ward is used, and especially how Jamal Adams is used, and we'll talk about him in just a moment. And then is Ivan Pace, has he worn out his welcome? Is he no longer useful on this team if the only thing he can do exceptionally well is rush the passer, and now you have a bunch of players that have the ability to do that from the linebacker position like Eric Wilson, Blake Cashman, and Jake Golday? I don't know. I think this could potentially be the last time we see Ivan Pace in a Vikings uniform, and it might not be him making it to the regular season. We'll see exactly that, although he is a good special teams player, so he might just earn a spot that way, but we might not see him on the field defensively for as much this season. And then Jay Ward, Theo Jackson, both had their issues last year, both had times, some high times as well, but they are going to be in competition with one another. Josh Metellus not really in competition, just kind of where you put him in all of these different defensive personnel settings. Sometimes he'll be the deep safety. Sometimes we all know the graphic where he's played every single defensive snap at some point during the season from every single position, but it'll just be kind of how he fits into whatever mix of these 7 of these players, whatever mix of 7 that is on the field at any one point in time. I think it's going to be a versatile, amoeba-like defense for Brian Flores, and I am excited to see all of those guys compete and all of those guys get their roles within that defensive setting, because I think all of them can get 300-plus snaps at least over the course of this season. And then finally, of course, Kyler Murray versus JJ McCarthy. That is the last big battle of training camp that we have as our headliner, as our marquee, and we'll talk about all of that in just a little bit. For now, I want to pose this. This is the most exciting training camp. This is the most competitive training camp, the most interesting, intriguing, whatever adjective you want to use It is the one that you're going to want to keep your eyes glued on the most since 2010. Think about what happened in 2010. Minnesota had a Tavares Jackson versus Sage Rosenfels battle that was kind of just a fake battle with the hope that Brett Favre would decide to make his return back to Minnesota. And then he did. And then Steve Hutchinson and Ryan Longwell and Jared Allen all take a plane, and we're watching Flight Tracker to see where it's going. Oh, it's going to Hattiesburg. It's the Wilf's private jet. They're picking up Brett Favre. They're bringing him to training camp. They're going into his house, almost like a CIA raid on some rebel battalion leader that the USA doesn't want in charge of a certain country, and kidnapping him and bringing him up to Minnesota to play quarterback. That's kind of what it was like, and that's why 2010, I think, is always going to go down as the most interesting offseason, or the most interesting training camp, I should say, in Vikings history. But I think this one is going to end up being a close second or third, because you could also say 2009, where a similar thing happened with Brett Favre, was just as interesting as 2010. But this is going to be the most interesting training camp since that time, especially the most competitive. We've had quarterback battles in the past, but we've never had quarterback battles that have players like a number 10 overall pick against a all-pro level quarterback going for that starting job. We've had Sage Rosenfels versus Tavares Jackson. We've had Brooks Bollinger versus Kelly Holcomb. And we've had all of those. Gus Frerotte versus Tavares Jackson. And through all of that, none of those have been players that you're excited to get the start for you for the next season. It's competitive because no matter which one of these quarterbacks starts for Minnesota, it should be better than the floor that Sage Rosenfels or Tavares Jackson would have provided for the 2010 Minnesota Vikings if Brett Favre never decided to come back. Some other ones that are in the running for the most competitive or most interesting with the most storylines since 2010, you could say 2014. That was a time where we had our rookie quarterback from the first round, and we also were experiencing Mike Zimmer for the first time. And the Vikings had signed a number of free agents during that offseason, like Linval Joseph and Captain Munnerlyn, and it was exciting to see how all those guys would integrate onto Minnesota's defense. Anthony Barr during his first training camp, but I don't think there were any storylines that necessarily came out of the 2014 season. 2016 was interesting in a panicked, oh shit sort of way, because at the end of training camp, Teddy Bridgewater gets injured. Up until that point, you are watching Teddy Bridgewater and intrigued with how he's going to take the next step in his third season, and then he has that catastrophic knee injury, and then it becomes this panicked game of, oh boy, who's going to be our starting quarterback? Is it going to be Sean Hill? Is it going to be Taylor Heineke? And then they end up going and trading a first-round pick to bring Sam Bradford in. So that was interesting because for about a week, we weren't sure what was going to happen, but it was interesting in a scary sort of way. 2021 was also intriguing because it was where you could tell if things went wrong this season that the Minnesota Vikings infrastructure would be completely blown up. It was Mike Zimmer basically at the podium every single day calling out Kirk Cousins for not being vaccinated and against the COVID, because he needs to be there for his team no matter what, and if he is not vaccinated and catches COVID later on in the season, he has to sit out, and saying like, we just need to do this, and kind of just tired of all of the malarkey around the Minnesota Vikings. It was his IDGAF attitude during the course of that 2021 season that made every single or at least the training camp, that made every single press conference during that training camp must listen, must watch. And then 2024 would be the other one in the running, because JJ McCarthy getting his first opportunity to show what he can do at the NFL level. But that lasted only for a little bit because McCarthy was injured in the first preseason game and missed the rest of the season. And even though it ended up being a great season for the Vikings in mass, I think that training camp period from McCarthy's injury to the start of the regular season, it was kind of a more disappointing sense and not a interesting sense, because most of us weren't super excited about Sam Darnold being the quarterback for a full 17-game season. We ended up being wrong about that, and he ended up winning a Super Bowl a year after leaving the Minnesota Vikings. So those are my ones that are in the running for the most exciting training camps since 2010. Go ahead and drop yours in the comments below. But I think that 2026 blows all of those out of the competition because of what this team can do, the precipice that this team is on. They are on a razor's edge of completely falling apart and resetting, or if they get the right quarterback play, becoming a legitimate Super Bowl contender. And even though that feeling is scary, it still is fun to be in that position and to see how it all plays out, even if it ends up going to our ultimate doom. I don't think there's much of a middle ground for this Minnesota Vikings team. It is their quarterback play clicks, and now they're going to be a NFC North contender and even a Super Bowl contender, or their quarterback play doesn't click. Kevin O'Connell doesn't have the juice that he had through the first 4 years of his Minnesota Vikings tenure, and this team goes by the wayside. Scary, fun, exciting to watch all of that happen here in 2026. And one of the guys that's going to be a part of it is Jamal Adams. The Minnesota Vikings signing Jamal Adams the other day to a contract for the 2026 season. He is a linebacker safety hybrid who Nolan Tinsley at one point was a part of a front office that traded a first-round pick to the Jets to go and get Jamal Adams. He's had that pedigree as a player, but obviously took some steps back. And last year, when he was with the Raiders, they shifted him from safety to linebacker. He played in all 17 games, started 4. He had a sack, but he is kind of the quintessential player that you need on a defense for the defensive trends that the NFL is taking right now, which is this big nickel sort of thing. You either need a linebacker that can be very, very good in coverage, or has coverage experience. Jamal Adams as a safety has that coverage experience, or you need to be a safety that is very, very big. And both of those players kind of look and feel like the same sort of guy, and Jamal Adams merges both of those. A guy who used to play safety is now a linebacker, can be a very integral part of this Minnesota Vikings defense when they want to go big nickel. Now, he only had about 400, 500 snaps for the Raiders last year and was kind of not a bit player, but definitely a role player within that Raiders system. And I think that's kind of going to be what he does for the Minnesota Vikings. I like everything he does going downhill. When I was watching on film from last year, whether it be against the run or rushing the passer, he does a lot of good things. He is like Josh Metellus in that he can do those things, but I would say he's a more fluid version of Josh Metellus in that Jamal Adams is better going downhill. Josh Metellus is better in a backpedal and can do more things in the deeper areas of the field. He's more of a jack of all trades, while Jamal Adams is a master at downhill attacking, which the Minnesota Vikings need to have. There were times, especially one play, Jamal Adams trying to hit the edge on a run play. He is going to be the one that is setting the edge. And a lot of times you're going to have an edge rusher do that because they have the ability to not be moved as much by an offensive lineman or a tight end. The Raiders trusted Jamal Adams to do that in this situation, and immediately he gets sealed off by Travis Kelce. And it looks like that gap is going to open up to the inside. But Jamal Adams, despite being sealed off, despite having his shoulder in the base of Travis Kelce, is able to quickly swivel the hips and get into a better position, extend his arms off of Travis Kelce, stack, and then set the edge, kind of control the block while drifting to the outside and forcing the running back, I think it was Isaiah Pacheco, to cut it back in and go for no gain. So even when he was in a bad position, he was able to make a favorable play. He was able to recover, and that is the sort of athleticism that he provides. And he has the ability to just knife in through whatever run fit gap that he's responsible for and blow up a running back if he needs to. He's not always going to be able to go up against a guard or a tackle, but if your assignment for him is going to be a tight end or a running back or a fullback, that's going to be an assignment that he's going to be able to use. But I think he's going to be more used in the Viking system as a pass rusher, kind of akin to what we've seen from Ivan Pace in the past, and when Ivan Pace has been at his best. I like him as a B-gap rusher, and the NFL defense in the modern day, in 2025 and 2026, has been trending towards this nail pressure path that has been popularized by Mike Macdonald and the Seattle Seahawks defense that just won a Super Bowl, Jesse Minter as well. And it is a simulated pressure or a blitz. Seahawks run it more as a simulated pressure because they don't like to blitz all that often. They like having the 7 guys deep in coverage. So they'll only rush 4 with it, but you can rush it with 5, you can rush it with 6. But essentially, you're having, on the weak side of the formation, of the offensive formation, you're having the edge rusher attack wide against the offensive tackle. And then you're having the second most interior rusher, whichever the next defensive tackle is on that line of scrimmage, he's going to crash to the inside towards the center. So he's going to cross the face of the guard and go towards the center because he's going to carry that guard with him, at least for a moment. And then you have, with the edge taking the tackle all the way to the outside, with the defensive tackle taking the guard to the inside, that opens up this large B gap, which you can send a rusher through. And in the Super Bowl, it was Devon Witherspoon a couple of times that had that big opening for the Seattle Seahawks, and they were only rushing 4. So that means you have 3 guys rushing from one side. You have one kind of as just a token edge rusher from the other side to occupy them, and you try to disguise it as best as you can. Jamal Adams did an excellent job disguising whether he was going to go back in coverage or whether he was going to blitz when he was with the Raiders last season, and then he would get through almost untouched through that B gap. The Seahawks also would sometimes send 2 players through that B gap, the first one to take on the block of the running back, and then the next one to find where the open space is and then get unabated to the quarterback. But what we saw Brian Flores want to do when he was blitzing his linebackers last season is just occupy some of those running backs. Go ahead and make sure they can't get out into, especially if they're a good receiving back, make sure that they can't get out of the backfield, essentially. Force them to stay in to protect so that they cannot be a 5th receiving option for the quarterback. And even at times when, in that Lions game, for example, when Blake Cashman and Eric Wilson were both blitzing at the same time, or at least both showing blitz time and time again, and then would twist or they would do a cross dog sort of blitz where whoever was on the right side loops over to the left, and whoever was on the left side loops over to the right, and they're both essentially going through each other's gaps based on where they were lined up at the start of the play. A lot of times that was just to make sure Jahmyr Gibbs could not get out into the flat or get out into the curl zone and get open and convert on first down. It was to make sure, okay, now he has to block, and he got blown up a lot while he was blocking, but even when he didn't, the task was accomplished. Don't give Jared Goff that outlet. And now when you have Jamal Adams being able to do that through the B gap, and then you still have the ability to have Wilson, Cashman, Pace, whoever it is, do a cross dog and put pressure on the A gap as well, because we know Brian Flores isn't going to rush 4 when he uses his pressure a lot of the time. He's going to rush 5, 6, maybe even 7. And he can combine and integrate the double A gap pressure with this Jamal Adams B gap pressure, and I think we're going to see some really cool stuff, some really cool pressure packages from this Minnesota Vikings defense, and I think signaling that is the signing of Jamal Adams. I think he's going to be an integral part of this defense on 3rd down and long, and is going to get his share of pressures on opposing quarterbacks. He's not as great backpedaling. He's not as great of a guy in coverage. He kind of is more of a spot drop sort of player in the underneath zones instead of a match coverage. He covers grass, not players some of the times, or is a little bit slow to find the player in his zone that he's supposed to match up with. But when he is going downhill and attacking downhill, he is going to be a tough person for opposing defenses to deal with. So we should all be super excited about what Jamal Adams is going to bring to the Minnesota Vikings in 2026. 3-time Pro Bowler. And also of note is that reports after the Jamal Adams signing is that Harrison Smith still has not signed with the Minnesota Vikings, but reporters have said that the Jamal Adams signing does not mean that Harrison does not have any effect, or was not decided by a Harrison Smith decision or a leaning towards a Harrison Smith decision. So this doesn't affect whether Harrison Smith is coming back or not coming back. This wasn't done because the Vikings know if Harrison Smith is not coming back. It was done because it gives Brian Flores another weapon to use with his pressure packages, with his blitz packages, and with his sim pressures that is going to make the Minnesota Vikings defense even more tough to stop next season. All right, next piece of news, Brian O'Neill is going to get a big extension. He was pretty much the only player coming into training camp that you thought might hold in, might not practice, might show up, but have some, little tweaked injury, wink, wink, like TJ Hawkinson a couple of years ago, and wouldn't practice on the field until, wouldn't be able to recover from that injury until the medicine that is a contract extension allowed him to recover from that injury. And Minnesota Vikings were just like, okay, we don't want all that drama. Nolan Teasley doesn't want all that drama. Vikings signed Brian O'Neill to a 4-year, $96 million extension. Now, obviously, not all that's guaranteed. I don't think those contract details have been fully released. They weren't in the NFL Network or ESPN reports that I saw. How much of that is guaranteed? How much of that is a signing bonus? How does that all spread out over the next 4 years? It's, as it looks first glance, it's $24 million a year average annual value. Of course, it's not going to end up being that when we get all of the contract details, and it might end up being more of a 2-year or 3-year contract when all is said and done. But it keeps this offensive line together, an offensive line that had so many issues last year staying healthy. It would have been a shame if we had that same sort of issue, not because of injuries this year, but because we weren't willing to pay a premier right tackle in the league. He is a top 10 right tackle. He has just been a solid player at worst and a Pro Bowl level player with 2 appearances at best since he came to the Minnesota Vikings 2018 or 2019 season. He has anchored that right side and has given us peace of mind on that part of the field, even in the times where the rest of the offensive line has completely looked like Swiss cheese. So being able to get him into a full training camp, to get him paid deservedly so, and to keep him in purple and keep that offensive line together, I think is going to do wonders for the rest of training camp, whether it is a new offensive system where Kevin O'Connell is integrating some Kyler Murray stuff that he had in Arizona, or whether it's just the old one. It's still nice to have Brian O'Neill in there all the same and practicing throughout the whole training camp and not having to ramp up at the last minute or hold in through the season, have that injury extend into, week 2 or week 3. It's nice to have that, off of his mind and off of our worries as well, so that he can start all 17 games if he is healthy. And I think this offensive line, if healthy, is going to do some good things. Will Fries had his first season last year. He wasn't great, but he was still doing what he did well in Indianapolis, which if they were doing an outside run, he can reach better than most guards in the NFL. He's still able to anchor in pass protection. It might be some movement or stunts or twists that he might have a harder time picking up now that he's not next to his former Colts teammate Ryan Kelly, but I trust that Will Fries is going to look more than his 2024 self than his 2025 self, especially if with Frank Smith, the Vikings go more towards an outside zone sort of running system, whereas last year they did a lot of duo and man concepts, although, they switch it, they use everything, but it was more duo based on that and based on ISO and duo sort of plays instead of outside zone. So with Frank Smith coming in, maybe it's more outside zone. Maybe it plays more to the strengths that Will Fries has, which is an offensive lineman on the move, trying to get to the opposite shoulder of the defensive tackle that is in his play side gap on those runs. And then at center, again, we talked about it. If Blake Brandel wins and shows that he can snap a football consistently without any issues, which was a big if last year, but if he does that, he has shown himself to anchor against some really good defensive linemen in the NFL last year when he was playing the center position. So I like what Blake Brandel brings. I'm excited for a second year of Donovan Jackson, who is probably an average offensive guard during his rookie season. I think that is something that you will take 10 times out of 10 if you are a fan of a team and your rookie plays at that level during his first season. I think that kind of spells out that there's going to be good things to come. And then obviously Christian Darrisaw again, if he is healthy all season, is a top 5 left tackle in the NFL. So you've got a offensive line that is filled with really good talent, elite talent on the edges, and then some good potential with the 3 guys on the interior. The state of the offensive line is good, knock on wood, if it stays healthy. And the Vikings have also kind of prepared for the fact that it might not be healthy by bringing in Ryan Vandemark, who I think we're going to see in some of these 12-13 personnel sets. I think he's going to be a 6th offensive lineman. Buffalo liked to do a lot of that last year, so I think he's going to see playing time even if Darrisaw and O'Neal are healthy throughout the course of the season. A lot of teams shifted to using 6 offensive linemen in some of their run sets, so I think we're going to see a little bit of that from Ryan Vandemark. And then also bringing in Caleb Tiernan in the draft is going to give you another depth option if O'Neal or if Darrisaw goes down with any sort of injury. All that to say, great offensive line. I also like what Brian O'Neal provides as a captain in the locker room. I don't know if he is a captain, but he is a good locker room presence. There was some like NFL Films or Minnesota Vikings media sort of deal where he's talking to JJ McCarthy, bolstering his confidence. And even in the offseason, when I think a lot of like even Justin Jefferson and Aaron Jones, intentionally or not, are like, oh, quarterback play needs to be better. Brian O'Neal, during his offseason interviews on podcasts and all the like, is saying, yeah, JJ McCarthy is going to be a good quarterback. He is still putting faith in that rookie, I guess now 3rd-year quarterback, the youngster, that is going to compete with Kyler Murray as we head into training camp. And let's talk about this battle between Kyler Murray and JJ McCarthy. Ian Rappaport reports last week that this is going to be a real competition, and that this competition is going to go potentially all the way to the regular season. I've seen some takes say that Kevin O'Connell really wants JJ McCarthy to win this. I don't know if that's true. I think that might be some people who have their own biases towards the McCarthy side of things, reading into quotes in a way that fits their point of view. But saying that we think JJ McCarthy, that he wants JJ McCarthy to win this thing, but he's going to have to earn it to win it. And I've also seen the take that, no, Ian Rappaport is wrong. This is not a real competition. And I can't believe that this take is still out there. Of course it is a real competition between JJ McCarthy and Kyler Murray. If it was going to be Kyler Murray's job outright, he wouldn't be splitting reps. He wouldn't be learning a new offense and only being able to learn it half the time. You want your quarterback, if he's going to be your starting quarterback, to be as most prepared to know your offense as they can be. And if you are only giving them half the snaps because you want to appease the media in some way, or try to trick the media, I think that the cost of that, the cost of keeping your quote-unquote starting quarterback out of reps for half the time, is too grave of a cost for whatever payoff you think you're getting in fooling the media or fooling your week 1 opponent, who's not going to be fooled. I remember when Eric Mangini did this for the Cleveland Browns leading up to the first game against the Minnesota Vikings in the 2009 season. He's like, oh, is it going to be Brady Quinn? Is it going to be Derek Anderson? And really, they had the quarterback in mind the whole time. I think it ended up being Brady Quinn, but whoever it was, it didn't matter because it wasn't going to make much of a difference for how the Vikings game plan was going to go. There is no payoff to hiding your cards here if you really have Kyler Murray, automatically winning this competition. It is a real competition. Kyler Murray is the favorite in that competition, but it is a competition. It is going to go down to the wire. Kyler Murray needs to catch up in the offense. As weird as that sounds, JJ McCarthy at this moment knows the offense probably better than Kyler Murray. And if Kyler Murray can't catch up to the offense or can't show that he's up to task and JJ McCarthy shows that he's taken significant steps forward, guess what? It's going to be JJ McCarthy's job come week 1 against the Green Bay Packers. So I'm tired of hearing and seeing on Twitter that this competition is fake because it doesn't make any sort of logical sense. It seems to be a casual take or a media-driven hot take because everyone just assumes that Kyler Murray is going to get that job. There is no reason to have a fake competition when you are bringing in a quarterback to learn a new offensive system. He would need all the time that he could get to learn that offense. And again, the cost of keeping Kyler Murray, if he is the starting quarterback and this is all just a big old ruse, the cost of keeping him out of the backfield for half the snaps during training camp is too grave for no payoff. So stop saying that this is not a real competition. You can say that Kyler Murray has the inside track to win the competition, but saying that it is not a competition is just completely asinine, and I think shows a failure in understanding of that person's view of how an NFL team runs. All that to be said, yes, Kyler Murray is the favorite. Kyler Murray probably has a 65% chance to win this quarterback competition against JJ McCarthy. But I'm not going to count JJ McCarthy out. And in fact, I'm probably going to be cheering for JJ McCarthy to win. I'm going to cheer for whatever quarterback wins this, and I think the Vikings are going to be in a good place despite whatever quarterback, regardless of which one of these two quarterbacks wins this. Because if it is Kyler Murray, if Kyler Murray wins this quarterback competition, we've seen him be a Pro Bowl level quarterback. We've seen him go on runs in 2021 when he was a favorite to win MVP through the first half of the season. He has shown that ability, and even when he's been not as great, he still showed a competent floor with the Arizona Cardinals. So at the very least, you're getting that this season as your baseline, as your floor of quarterback play. Your floor is a former Pro Bowl quarterback. Your floor is a former number 1 overall pick. And if Kyler Murray wins that job, that is a good place to be in. Now, assuming that this quarterback competition is going to not have any politics, for lack of a better word, attached to it, and is going to be completely skill-based, and assuming you have trust and faith in Kevin O'Connell for being able to properly grade both of these quarterbacks based solely on their skill and how they're going to mold into your offense, then yes, if JJ McCarthy wins, that means he would assumedly have played better in training camp than Kyler Murray has played during his NFL career. And that would mean that JJ McCarthy has taken enough steps forward to be at a Pro Bowl sort of level. So while I'm not cheering for JJ McCarthy to win this competition no matter what, I want JJ McCarthy to win because if we assume all best intentions by all parties, that means that JJ McCarthy has shown himself, has improved enough to be better than Kyler Murray, who, again, has already provided us with a solid baseline if he is our starting quarterback going into the 2026 season. All that to say is I think we're in good hands no matter what for 2026. 2027, that might change. If McCarthy wins it, then you have a quarterback under team control, and if he shows himself to be good, then you can, lock down that contract extension, and you're going to be set for the future with an even younger guy. If it's Kyler Murray, you're going to have to immediately pay him a lot more. But for 2026, where it stands right now, I think the Vikings are in good hands, no matter if it is Kyler Murray who wins the competition or JJ McCarthy that wins the competition, because either way, you're going to then get effectively a Pro Bowl level quarterback, or the ability to be a Pro Bowl level quarterback. And again, I'm not going to write JJ McCarthy out just because of what he showed at the beginning of last season. Keep in mind, this is a player that missed all of his rookie season, that never played in a game, that never got practice reps outside of the first few weeks of training camp, comes in off of a season-ending knee injury from a year ago, and leads a comeback in his first ever start. Doesn't look great. Doesn't look like he has all the offensive minutia, not just talking about throwing the football and reading a defense, but breaking a huddle and getting the play calls out. Didn't look like he had all of that figured out, but still was able to be effective. Takes a step back against Atlanta, but we're talking about a guy who in his first 6 games, yes, looked really bad, but it's a player who is the youngest quarterback in the league that is coming off of a season-long injury. And if you're going to give him just a leash of 6 games, then yes, you've truly failed your starting quarterback, and the team is the failure, and it is not JJ McCarthy. If you are pulling the leash after 6 games, especially when during those 6 games there were other injuries that came into play, I think that is absolutely asinine, and there needs to be there needs to be urgency, but there also needs to be some sort of patience level. And when we saw the last 4 games of JJ McCarthy's season last year, he showed the ability to be a starting quarterback. And yeah, the offense was simplified. He's still throwing over the middle. He still had wide receivers dropping passes. And even in that 6-game span where he looked awful, he had really good moments against the Ravens, really good moments against the Lions, a comeback drive against the Bears. It was really the Green Bay Packers game and the Atlanta Falcons game where there was absolutely no positives to be gained from JJ McCarthy's performance in that one. But even in some of those bad moments, there were some really good moments from JJ McCarthy, and then he puts it all together against Dallas and against Washington and looks good against New York. The interception that he threw was off the hands of one of his wide receivers that should have really been caught, and then looks good in the time that he's spent against Green Bay. So you're having a sample size now of 4 games where he's looked good, 6 games where he's looked bad, all of this in just his first season. I don't know why there is such a witch hunt to get JJ McCarthy off this team. I think he could win this battle, and even in the stuff that he struggled with last year, which was the mechanics and accuracy based off the mechanics, we've seen JJ McCarthy make huge improvements year over year if you were paying any attention to his career at Michigan. 2022, in that playoff loss to TCU, JJ McCarthy looked horrendous. He did not look like the first round quarterback pedigree that he had coming into the 2023 season that people were giving him. 2023, he comes in and he has made significant changes in his delivery, in his accuracy, and in his ability to read a defense and not just get stuck on the first front side concept of the play, but also being able to see if it's not there, he can have the timing and rhythm to go to the backside to make a play. That was a significant step in the development of JJ McCarthy while he was at Michigan. He knew what the problem was. He put in the steps to solve that problem, and he solved that problem. I have faith that if it is that same guy, and that is not a guy now that is blinded by the fame of the NFL and doesn't really care anymore because he has all the money and he has all of the fame, I am confident that he put in the work this offseason to put himself in as good of a position to win this quarterback competition if he can outplay Kyler Murray. But again, the thesis from all of this is no matter what, I think the 2026 Minnesota Vikings are in good hands with their quarterback position, provided whoever wins it stays healthy. All right, final pieces of news here. Adrian Peterson is going to join the Minnesota Vikings Ring of Honor on November 9th against the Buffalo Bills. That's big. For me, Adrian Peterson, his start of his career kind of aligned up when I really started to pay attention to Minnesota Vikings football on a week-to-week basis, not just reading about it in the Star Tribune on Sundays or, hearing about games, but actually watching intently every single game. I started really doing that during the 2007 season. That's when Adrian Peterson started playing. So he's been a vital part of my growth and football viewership over my life. Obviously, there is the child beating allegations where he hits his kid with a switch. And that's always going to be something that I think is going to be difficult for a lot of folks, including myself, to get past when thinking about him just purely as a person. I'm not sure if he is the best person. Obviously, he's also not like the brightest guy because he he made it so much money and is very, very much in debt right now. But as it came to him as a football player, absolutely deserving of making the Vikings Ring of Honor, the 2012 MVP. There were games where he just looked like the best player in NFL history at times. That Chargers game with 296 yards. The 2012 season, the final 4 games, where Christian Ponder had just had a terrible game against the Green Bay Packers to put the Minnesota Vikings at 6-6. And the Vikings were like, okay, we are going to limit the dropbacks severely for Christian Ponder, and Adrian Peterson, it's going to be all on you. And every defense that the Vikings went up against knew that. Those final 4 games of the season where he goes for over 200 against the Rams, over 100 against the Bears, not a great efficiency performance against the Texans, but was able to grind it enough to get it done, and then goes for the 200 yards against the Packers in the season finale to get the Minnesota Vikings in the playoffs. So when everybody knew he was going to get the ball because Christian Ponder had been so subpar as a quarterback, they knew the only way they were getting offense is through Adrian Peterson, and still opposing defenses weren't able to stop him. That is probably what I'm going to be remembering from Adrian Peterson's career the most, is that 4-game stretch where it looked like he was a ghost running through defenses, that he was phasing in and out of players with such ferocity and with such speed. So congratulations to Adrian Peterson. Again, he will be inducted on November 9th against the Buffalo Bills. Minnesota Vikings signed running back Jordan Mims, kind of a depth piece for them, obviously behind Xavier Scott, Aaron Jones, Jordan Mason. He has a uphill battle if he wants to make this team. And then defensive backs coach Gerald Alexander has been suspended for 3 weeks by the team after a DWI over the weekend. He released a statement taking full accountability for his actions, accepting the punishment. He will be out 3 weeks. He is going to be new for the Minnesota Vikings. Drontae Jones, you might remember, was the old defensive backs coach, but he got a job with the Washington Commanders to be their defensive coordinator, and now Gerald Alexander is going to miss the first 3 weeks of the regular season, and we're going to have an interim guy for those first 3 weeks before getting our fully new defensive backs coach integrated into the week-to-week game plan. He's a guy that had been with Brian Flores at different spots during Flores' career, Pittsburgh included, when he had that, when Flores went there to be an assistant under Mike Tomlin for the 1 year where nobody wanted to touch him because it was the first year of the lawsuit. Gerald Alexander was also there with that Pittsburgh Steelers defense. So those two have familiarity with one another. Obviously, don't drive drunk. Hopefully he comes back and doesn't make that same mistake again, because it is a mistake that can be deadly and can cost the lives of others, and definitely is a selfish decision. And so hopefully he has learned from that and takes steps to improve his life. We haven't seen Wes Phillips get another DWI. So hopefully Gerald Alexander can follow in that same sort of path. Well, next week, we're going to finally have some videos to pour over, whether it be on social media or the Minnesota Vikings team page. I'm showing the videos of our quarterback competition, of our center competition, and we can kind of Zapruder film our way through all of it. But for right now, that's the vibe for today. Thanks for tuning in here and riding with me on the Vibe of the Vikings. Hit follow, drop a rating, and keep spreading the purple energy. We'll be back next week to check on the vibe again. Until then, stay loud, stay loyal, Skol.